Welcome back, everyone. I'm so pleased to have with me here today Erik Wurster, who is fighting climate change by leveraging carbon financing. And Erik works with Biolight, a social enterprise that has been invested in by the Acumen Fund and many others. They're in their fifth round of investing. And he spoke to my social entrepreneurship class today about revenue models and different ways of becoming a financially viable company while affecting social change. So thank you so much, Erik, for making the time to be with us today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
I want to start by asking you about Biolight. I think it's your third company, right? You first helped start a fund within E&Co and then helped found Up Energy, which sold cook stoves in Uganda. And now most recently, you've joined Biolight. So what does Biolight do and how do these all fit together?
Sure. So Biolight manufactures cooking, charging, and lighting technology for off-grid applications. So things like the camping industry in the U.S. or Europe, as well as emerging markets, targeting lower-income off-grid households in primarily sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay. And what does this carbon financing mean when you say carbon credits? And today you even threw out their biodiversity credits. How does this all work?
Right. So I spend most of my time figuring out how to develop carbon credits from the use of clean energy technology. So if you reduce emissions in a place like sub-Saharan Africa, under certain international trading mechanisms, you can turn that into a credit and then sell it to a corporation that wants to voluntarily offset their climate change footprint, or a national government. We've sold credits to the Swedish and Norwegian government, and there's a variety of different trading mechanisms in the world that enable those transactions to occur.
And those were all started at the Kyoto Protocol, because you mentioned that.
So the Kyoto Protocol governed, and that's now been replaced by the Paris Agreement.
Okay.
The Kyoto Protocol governed one of probably about 6 or 7 different trading mechanisms that exist in the world today. Without going into too much detail, because it gets complicated quickly with all those different mechanisms. But there's a variety of ways to do it, but the principle is the same.
So why do you need these carbon credits? Is it because you're not able to make ends meet just selling the cook stoves and other technologies?
Well, yes and no. We could make ends meet selling the cook stove, but we would end up selling them to higher income people in capital cities that are sort of weekend grillers, which is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to transform the way middle and lower income people cook, which is a serious public health issue, cooking on open fires that are really smoky and polluting.
So it's not just the climate change, it's also the public health challenge.
For sure, absolutely. And so carbon finance provides an additional revenue stream that allows us to target poorer, more remote customers.
Okay. Does it provide a huge proportion of your revenue, or how does it fit in with the direct sales in low-income countries and the other sales in the more developed countries?
So from the sale of a cook stove, and this varies from in different companies that I've worked in, depending on the product, but the sale of the cook stove, carbon revenues constitute probably about 30 or 40% of the total
That's
income.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. I mean, it's definitely economically transformational to the sale.
I've worked with so many social enterprises. Most of my work has been in my home country of Lebanon, and not with carbon, so it's a completely different scenario. But a lot of what we do is try to help diversify and increase revenue streams of social impact organizations so that they're not relying on grants or charity or anything like that. And so I wonder whether there could be other ways to create, it's almost like a parallel market. Can you imagine other ways to create parallel markets for social impact in a way, kind of like what they've done with carbon? Is anyone working on that?
They are. I mean, definitely to a lesser degree than carbon, but yeah, I mean, if you think about anything that has broader societal benefit that's not being valued by society or by economies, can be credited in some way. If you can prove to the market and the buyer that the impact that you're claiming is real and it's actually happening, you can create a credit around it and try to create a market around it. And so you can address, I heard of one case where they were literally trying to save a specific type of woodpecker, and they were selling biodiversity and habitat credits for this woodpecker. So it was literally a way of preserving that ecosystem and preserving biodiversity.
It's kind of the same principles as impact bonds, right? Or environmental bonds, in the sense that it's an innovative way of financing something that we know makes a difference, but you're not going to see the financial benefits up front, right?
Yeah, exactly. And valuing the non-monetary benefits, assigning some value to them in some structured way that financial markets can understand, creating a commodity that can be transferred. Yeah.
So what, in your experience, have been the limitations of this model? Because it sounds to me like, wow, this could have such a huge impact. It could solve so many problems. But I imagine there are so many challenges in implementation. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yeah, where do I start? There's definitely a lot of challenges. So, I think the biggest one is these markets are so nascent. And so when you go into a typical investor, a bank or a private equity fund, they're not going to know anything about it, and so you end up appealing to a very niche type of investor. So that's the most obvious challenge, but also nascent markets in general. Nascent markets are inefficient markets. So if you think about broader commodities markets like the stock markets, those are really efficient. They you can conduct trades super quickly with computers, and trading platforms are able to find buyers and sellers immediately, match buyers and sellers immediately. That's just not the case. I hope one day the carbon markets will become like that, but there's a long way to go before.
No, I just wrote down that quote that you said, nascent markets are inefficient markets, and any market we work with in social entrepreneurship is a nascent market. That's why it's so hard to make it.
Right.
What were closing words of advice would you have to a social entrepreneur that's doing something that before you came at the start of class, actually I think you caught the tail end of this, some of the students were saying, we talked to different, potential investors and the policymakers in the government, and we got feedback that there were deep concerns about what we're doing. And it's like, you're not the first person that heard that.
Yeah.
Do you have any parting words of advice for social entrepreneurs trying to make it in a difficult environment?
So expect to be rejected 95% of the time. That is part of raising money. Like if you go out and raise equity capital, you will be rejected 95% of the time. Let it roll off your shoulders, because if you don't, it's going to be a tough road. And that's, it's totally expected, and it's part of the game.
That's good advice.
I think that's my biggest one, to be honest, because it's going to happen to any entrepreneur.
I think so. And I think it speaks not just to the financing, but overall to rejection and failure in the entrepreneurship journey. It's part of the journey. It's going to happen the majority of the time. So you just have to go in there willing to face it. Yeah.
And it's what makes you stronger. And it probably is ultimately what will refine your business model into something that's, long-term successful.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Erik.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.